What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat and instead finds himself in the middle of a full-blown ambush? In just 37 seconds, a single dismissive comment from the host would trigger a meltdown so spectacular that it would end with a Hollywood star storming off set, leaving an entire panel speechless and a studio audience in absolute shock. This is the story of how Hugh Grant, the charming leading man from your favorite romantic comedies, became the unlikely hero in a clash that exposed the ugly side of daytime television. The atmosphere in the studio that morning seemed ordinary enough. The Loose Women panel was assembled, cameras were rolling, and the audience was settled in for what they assumed would be another light-hearted episode. Hugh Grant was there to promote his latest film, a project he had poured months of work into. He walked onto the set with his signature self-deprecating smile, waving to the audience as they applauded. Denise Welch sat at the center of the panel, flanked by the other hosts. There was an energy about her that day, something sharper than usual. The other panelists, including Ruth Langsford, Nadia Sawala, and Jane Moore, exchanged pleasantries with Hugh as he took his seat. The interview began smoothly enough. Ruth asked the first question about the film, and Hugh answered with his typical wit and humor. The audience laughed. Everything seemed perfectly pleasant. But then Denise leaned forward, and the tone shifted. "So Hugh," Denise began, her voice dripping with a kind of performative curiosity, "I have to ask, do you actually enjoy doing these press tours? Or are you just going through the motions because your contract says you have to?" The audience went quiet. It was the kind of question that sounded casual, but carried a sharp edge. Hugh paused, clearly taken aback, but he recovered quickly. "Well, I mean, it's part of the job, isn't it?" he said with a polite smile. "I genuinely enjoy talking about the work. The cast and crew put so much effort into this film, so I'm happy to share it with people." Denise leaned back, crossing her arms. "Right, but you've been doing this for decades. Surely it gets tiresome. All the same questions, all the fake smiles. You must get sick of it." Hugh's smile faltered slightly. "I wouldn't say fake smiles. I think people are generally interested, and I try to give honest answers." Jane Moore jumped in, trying to redirect. "Hugh, tell us about working with your co-star. I hear you two had amazing chemistry on set." Hugh looked relieved. "Oh yes, absolutely. She's incredibly talented and made every scene a joy to film. We had this one moment where..." But Denise wasn't finished. She cut him off mid-sentence. "Let's be honest though," Denise interjected, her voice louder now. "You've made a career out of playing the same character over and over again. The bumbling Englishman. Do you ever worry that people are bored of it?" The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ruth shifted in her seat. Nadia looked down at her notes. The audience sat in stunned silence. Hugh's expression changed. The polite smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "I'm sorry. Are we here to discuss the film or to critique my entire career?" Denise laughed, but it was a cold laugh. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking the questions everyone's thinking. You're a big boy. You can handle it." "That's not a question everyone's thinking," Hugh replied, his voice steady but firm. "That's you projecting your own opinion and disguising it as journalism." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Ruth tried to intervene. "Let's take a step back here. Hugh, we appreciate you being here today." But Denise talked over her. "I think what the audience wants to know is whether you're actually passionate about your work anymore, or if you're just coasting on your name recognition. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been phoning it in for years." The audience gasped. One woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Hugh stared at Denise for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but razor sharp. "You know what's interesting? I came here today to talk about a film that I'm genuinely proud of. A film that tackles real issues and features an incredible ensemble cast. But instead of asking about any of that, you've spent the last few minutes trying to tear me down for what? Ratings? To make yourself look edgy? Denise scoffed. Oh, please. You actors are all the same. The moment someone asks you a real question, you act like you're being attacked. A real question, Hugh repeated, his voice rising slightly. You call that a real question? You just accused me of phoning in my career. That's not journalism. That's just mean-spirited nonsense. Nadia tried to jump in. Hugh, I think what Denise is trying to say... No, Hugh interrupted, holding up his hand. I know exactly what she's trying to say. She's trying to provoke me. And you know what? It's working. Jane Moore looked genuinely distressed. Hugh, we didn't mean for this to... But Hugh wasn't looking at Jane. His eyes were locked on Denise. Do you treat all your guests like this, or am I special? Denise leaned forward, a smug smile on her face. I treat people who can handle honest conversation like adults. If you can't take it, maybe you should stick to scripted interviews where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. The other panelists looked horrified. Ruth put her hand on Denise's arm, as if trying to signal her to stop, but Denise shrugged her off. Hugh shook his head slowly. You know what the sad part is? I actually respected this show. I thought it was a platform for real conversation. But this isn't conversation. This is you, grandstanding and using me as a punching bag. Oh, come off it, Denise shot back. You're being dramatic. I'm just not fawning over you like everyone else does. There's a difference between not fawning and being outright rude, Hugh said, his voice ice cold now. And you've crossed that line multiple times in the last 5 minutes. The audience was completely silent. Some people looked angry. Others looked embarrassed. A few were filming on their phones. Ruth tried one more time to salvage the situation. Let's all just take a breath and... You know what, Ruth? Hugh said, cutting her off but speaking gently to her. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't think I can sit here anymore. Denise laughed again, that same cold, mocking laugh. What? Are you going to storm off? How very Hollywood of you. Hugh stood up slowly, removing his microphone. I'm not storming off. I'm making a choice. I choose not to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has more interest in creating drama than having a genuine conversation. He turned to the other panelists. Jane, Nadia, Ruth, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. You've been nothing but kind. Then he looked back at Denise. And you, I genuinely hope you take a moment to think about how you treat people. Because right now, you're not coming across as brave or edgy. You just seem cruel. Denise's smile faltered for the first time. You can't just walk off a live show. Watch me, Hugh said simply. And with that, he turned and walked off the set. The camera followed him as he made his way past the stunned crew members and through the studio doors. The audience sat in complete silence for several seconds before a few people started clapping. Then more joined in. Within moments, a significant portion of the audience was applauding Hugh's exit. Back on the panel, the hosts sat frozen. Ruth looked devastated. Jane had her head in her hands. Nadia stared at the table. And Denise sat there, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting the audience's reaction. Ruth finally spoke, her voice shaky. Well, that was unexpected. We'll take a quick break. But before they could cut to commercial, someone in the audience shouted, Good for him! Another voice joined in. She was completely out of line. Denise tried to respond. Oh, please. He couldn't handle a tough question. But Ruth cut her off, something she rarely did. Denise, those weren't tough questions. That was an ambush. The look on Denise's face was one of genuine shock. She clearly expected her fellow panelists to back her up, but instead, they were sitting there in uncomfortable silence. Jane finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. I think we owe Hugh an apology. That was unprofessional. Nadia nodded. Completely agree. I'm actually embarrassed right now. Denise looked around at her colleagues, realizing she was isolated. You're all being ridiculous. I was just doing my job. Your job is to interview guests, not attack them, Ruth said, and there was steel in her voice now. We've had hundreds of guests on this show, and I've never seen anyone walk off before. That should tell you something. The audience murmured in agreement. Someone else shouted, "She ruined it!" The energy in the room had completely turned against Denise. For the first time, Denise seemed to understand the gravity of what had happened. Her confident demeanor cracked slightly. I was just trying to ask different questions, something more interesting than the usual fluff. There's a way to ask challenging questions without being disrespectful, Jane said, and you crossed that line multiple times. The production team was scrambling behind the scenes. They had never dealt with anything like this before. A guest walking off was bad enough, but having the panel turn on one of their own hosts on live television was unprecedented. Ruth addressed the camera directly. I think we need to acknowledge what just happened here. Hugh Grant came on our show to talk about his work, and instead of giving him that platform, he was subjected to what I can only describe as an unfair interrogation. On behalf of the show, I apologize to Hugh and to our viewers. Denise's face flushed red. You're apologizing for me? I'm apologizing for what happened, Ruth clarified. And yes, that includes your behavior. The audience applauded again, louder this time. It was clear where their sympathies lay. Nadia spoke next. I think we also need to recognize that Hugh handled this with incredible grace. He could have shouted or made a scene, but he simply stated his boundaries and left. That takes real class. More applause from the audience. Denise sat there, looking smaller somehow, as the reality of the situation sank in. Jane looked directly at the camera. If you're watching, Hugh, we're sorry. You deserved better. The control room was in chaos. Producers were shouting instructions, trying to figure out how to proceed. They had another 20 minutes of showtime to fill, and their main guest was gone. Back in the studio, Ruth made a decision. I think we should end the show here. This isn't the kind of thing we can just move on from with a cooking segment. Denise finally found her voice again, but it was different now. Defensive. This is absurd. You're all acting like I committed some terrible crime. I asked some pointed questions. That's it. You belittled a guest, Ruth said flatly. You mocked his career. You questioned his integrity. And you did it all with this air of superiority that was honestly hard to watch. I was being honest, Denise protested weakly. Honesty without kindness is just cruelty, Jane said, and that's what that was. Cruel. The audience was still there, watching this entire internal conflict play out. Some were recording on their phones. Others were just staring in disbelief. This was not the light entertainment they had expected when they arrived at the studio that morning. Nadia turned to Denise. Do you even realize what you've done? We've just lost the trust of every potential guest who might have considered coming on this show. Who's going to want to sit here after watching you tear into Hugh like that? Denise had no answer. She looked around at her colleagues, at the audience, at the cameras, and seemed to finally understand that she had miscalculated badly. Ruth addressed the camera one final time. To our viewers at home, thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do better. We promise. As they cut to commercial, Denise remained seated, isolated and silent, while the other panelists quietly removed their microphones. The audience began to file out, many of them talking animatedly about what they had just witnessed. Someone near the front said loudly enough for the panel to hear, I've never seen anything like that. He was completely right to leave. Another audience member responded, Absolutely. She was horrible to him. I felt embarrassed just watching it. Denise heard every word. She sat there as the studio emptied, as her colleagues walked away without speaking to her, as the crew began breaking down the set. For someone who had tried so hard to create a memorable moment of television, she had certainly succeeded, just not in the way she intended. The contrast between Hugh's dignified exit and Denise's isolated aftermath couldn't have been more stark. He had walked away with his head held high, his integrity intact, and the support of the audience. She remained behind, facing the consequences of her actions, realizing too late that being provocative and being professional are not the same thing. In the green room, production assistants were already dealing with the fallout. Phone calls were being made, statements were being drafted, the network executives were being briefed. This was going to be a major story, and everyone knew it. But the most telling moment came from an unexpected source. The makeup artist who had prepared Hugh before the show spoke to one of the producers. "I've worked with him before. He's always kind, always professional. Whatever happened out there, it must have been really bad for him to walk away like that. He's not the type to make a scene." And that was perhaps the most damaging indictment of all. Hugh Grant, known for his professionalism and courtesy, had been pushed so far that he felt walking off a live television show was his only option. That said everything anyone needed to know about what had transpired on that set. The show had started as a simple promotional interview. It ended as a masterclass in how not to treat a guest, how quickly things can spiral out of control, and how sometimes standing up for yourself means walking away from a bad situation with dignity rather than engaging with hostility. Hugh had come to talk about his film, about his craft, about the things he was passionate about. Instead, he found himself defending his entire career against baseless attacks from someone who seemed more interested in creating conflict than fostering genuine dialogue. And when faced with that choice, between staying and enduring more disrespect or leaving and maintaining his self-respect, he chose the latter. The audience had seen it all unfold in real time. They had watched a respected actor being needled and provoked. They had seen him try to remain polite, try to redirect, try to give genuine answers despite the hostile questioning. And they had watched as he finally decided that enough was enough. What made it even more powerful was the reaction of the other panelists. These were Denise's colleagues, people she worked with regularly, and even they couldn't defend her actions. Their willingness to publicly distance themselves from her behavior, to apologize on behalf of the show, spoke volumes about how far over the line she had gone. In the end, what was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview became a defining moment. Not because of scandal or gossip, but because it revealed something fundamental about respect, professionalism, and knowing when to walk away. Hugh Grant may have left the set early, but he left as the clear winner in the eyes of everyone watching. He had maintained his composure, stated his boundaries, and refused to participate in a conversation that had devolved into personal attacks. And Denise Welch, who had tried so hard to create a memorable television moment, certainly got one. Just not the kind she could be proud of. She had wanted to be provocative, to ask the tough questions, to push back against celebrity culture. But in doing so, she had confused aggression with journalism, rudeness with honesty, and performative controversy with genuine insight. The cameras had captured everything. The initial pleasant atmosphere, the first uncomfortable question, the escalating tension, Hugh's attempts to remain professional, Denise's increasingly hostile approach, the shocked reactions of the other panelists, the gasps from the audience, and finally, that moment when Hugh stood up, removed his microphone, and walked away with quiet dignity. It was television that people would talk about for a long time, but not because it was good television. Because it was a cautionary tale about what happens when a host forgets that their job is to facilitate conversation, not to create confrontation for its own sake. When ego overtakes empathy, when the desire for viral moments overtakes basic human decency. The studio lights were dimming now. The audience had left. The crew was packing up equipment. The panelists had retreated to their dressing rooms. And somewhere, Hugh Grant was likely already on his way home, having successfully promoted his film in the most unexpected way possible. Not through a traditional interview, but by demonstrating grace under pressure and showing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own mistreatment. Back on the empty set, a single microphone lay on the guest chair where Hugh had left it. A small, mundane object that had become a symbol of a much larger moment. A reminder that respect is not optional, that professionalism matters, and that even in the world of entertainment, where drama is currency, there are still lines that should never be crossed. The aftermath would play out over the coming hours and days in ways the participants couldn't yet imagine. But in that studio, in those crucial minutes of live television, everything that needed to be said had already been said. Hugh had said it by walking away. The audience had said it with their applause. The other panelists had said it with their apologies and their visible discomfort. And Denise had said it with her silence at the end, sitting alone at that table, finally understanding the weight of her words and actions. What started as a promotional interview had become something else entirely. A moment of television that would be remembered not for the wit or the charm or the clever banter, but for the dignity of one person's exit and the clear message it sent about knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less than basic respect.